So Jim, take us back to the beginning.
My mother explained to me that when I was born and she gave birth to me, it was a raging snowstorm, and they couldn't get an ambulance there to get me to the hospital. And my grandmother helped deliver many babies with other people. She said it was so cold that they had to put hot water bottles alongside of her body to keep her warm, and she was going through a lot of pain. She said that my father was really overjoyed, and of course I didn't know what my future had in store for me. And here I am, this innocent child, just being brought into this world, and neither did my parents know what was ahead of me and what they were going to go through in dealing with me in the future. And of course the circumstances unfolded in a lot of negative ways in the future that affected me, had a traumatic effect on me, and had an effect on the rest of my family.
Were you the firstborn?
I was the second born. I had an older sister, Joy, and later on she helped in a lot of ways to look after me as I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. Happy family, mom and dad together.
Yeah, I know. I can remember my dad was away a lot of times because he was in the Navy. He was on the naval ships. And but then as I got to the area of about 6 years old, when he'd come home in a drunken state. And he'd come through the front door, and it was like somebody coming through the front door that I never knew. And he would be very vulgar and in a rage. He'd scream and shout at my mother. Then there'd be verbal exchanges back and forth. And then he'd be hitting on my mother and hurting her. And I would crawl behind the couch and cry. And in fear, I didn't know what was going on and why he was hurting my mother.
So like the weather, at the time of your birth, things became very volatile.
Yes, they did. And there were good times. At times when my dad would come home, he'd pick me up and give me a hug and show some affection to me. And sometimes he'd bring me home a toy after he came back from his travel on the naval ships. But whenever it came to drinking, it seemed that he would become this totally different person. And the next day, he wouldn't remember what his words were, and he wouldn't remember what his actions were towards the other members of the family.
Alcohol came into the picture,
Yeah.
changed everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brought a lot of confusion to me at that very young age.
So who did you look to?
The only one I could look to is my mother, and my mother would just try to console me and say, "Don't worry, Jimmy, things will be fine, things will be fine, don't let it scare you, don't let it frighten you." And she'd give me a hug in that and try to reaffirm me that it would be all right. But things eventually got worse. I felt hopeless and just in a state of shock as to what was happening between my father and my mother. And I wanted to be somewhere else.
Did they try to hide it at all from you kids, or was it out in the open?
My mother, she was drinking also, and she would hide the fact that she was drinking. And she would drink that and more or less look at the clock as to when he was expected to come home.
Yeah.
And whether or not it would be a good evening or an evening of violence and a lot of verbal insults exchanged back and forth.
Did she try to protect you kids in some way from that?
Yeah, she tried to protect us by sending us off to our room, but no matter what part of the house we were sent to, we could still hear everything that was being said, and then we could hear the dishes being smashed, and we could hear her hollering. And her screams in pain, which affected me traumatically back then as a young kid and still does today. I just kept wanting to get away from it. And my hiding spot was always behind the couch. Yeah.
Were there times when, you know, your relationship with your dad was not as volatile, when you had a good relationship with your dad?
Oh yeah, there were times that my dad had me involved in sports. He got me involved in playing hardball and bought me a nice leather glove, and he got me involved in YMCA in swimming. But even though those were good times, they were always interrupted by the negative things that would transpire in our home.
Give me an idea of how bad the domestic violence got for you at that time.
Well, I'll relate to one incident where my dad came home drunk.
Jimmy, that is a beautiful picture.
It's us.
And is that you? And who's that?
You.
And he came into the kitchen area where I was coloring.
What?
Nothing.
Where's dinner?
Dinner was 3 hours ago. Where were you?
Where was I?
Jimmy, sweetheart, why don't you go show your picture to your sisters?
Okay.
He got in the verbal exchanges with my mother, and anyway, my mother was pregnant at that time.
Leave it. I want supper.
Let go. I'll go get it.
Stupid bitch.
I thought I'd never see my mother again.
Wow.
When they took her out of the home. And of course, I ended up running away from home to go see where my mother was. I tried to locate my mother. I knew she was in a hospital. And so I kept roaming the streets. I had a vague idea in the area where the Halifax General Hospital was, the Victoria General. And I went to see my mother, and I went and asked the nurse, and she gave me directions to what floor. I took the elevator up to the floor, and when I stood in the doorway looking at my mother, she looked at me, and
Jimmy, what are you
she was surprised to see me, and more or less said, "What are you doing here, Jimmy?" I just wanted to be in her presence. And we cried some, hugged each other.
You can't be doing this, okay? You can't keep running away. It's too dangerous. I worry about you. Jimmy, I'm gonna have to call your father. He'll come get you.
No! You'll beat me for running away and coming here.
And of course, eventually my father appeared, and then he took me home. And of course, I got my beating and told not to be running away anymore.
And when he came after you, how did that feel?
It wasn't until they were told that I wasn't attending school and I was being a truant. I was stealing things, fighting with other children in the school, and I would fight whenever I was teased because I had a learning disability. And my father and mother didn't understand this, that I had a learning disability. And when he was told about it, he'd say, "Come with me, son."
Jimmy?
And he would use a strap then at that time, and just a regular type of a strap to strap me. And then sit me down and tell me that I'm to attend school, I was not to fight, I was not to steal things.
Jimmy, if I give you a beating for something you've done, to correct you, you run away from home. If I don't beat you, it isn't long before you run away. Why, Jimmy?
I don't know.
Your mother thinks you don't like it here at home, Jimmy.
Yes, I like being at home, but things happen at times, then I just run away.
What is it that happens that makes you feel like you have to run away from home?
I don't like it when your mom are fighting all the time, and I have trouble learning at school. Then I get all upset inside, and I just run away.
Well, Jimmy, if you behave yourself, you don't steal, I wouldn't have a reason to beat you.
I had a wall of resentment growing inside of me that was separating me from having good feelings towards my father. I started having resentments. I wouldn't run up the street to greet him when he was on his way home from work where I used to. I used to run up and greet him. I'd be happy, and he'd lift me up and carry me on his shoulders to the front of the house. And now I wanted to hide from my father. I didn't want to see my father. I felt he was only going to hurt me as well as hurt my mother. And then things got progressively worse.
Okay. How worse?
Well, it went from the ordinary belt to a navy belt, which is a web belt. It's a wide belt. It was white, like canvas, rough canvas surface. And there's also metal on it. And if he was in a drunken state, I would be hit in other parts of the body rather than just on the butt.
So, Jim, you're describing all of these early events in your life, your father, the trauma, the violence, all the emotional aspects of your early story. What was your tendency in terms of trying to, cope or deal with what was happening to you at the time? I mean, you talked about hiding behind the couch. You talked about being in a closet, closing yourself in. What other ways did you deal with what was happening to you at that time?
Well, the only thing I felt open to me was to keep running away from those circumstances. I kept running away from home. And later on with my younger sister, we were being babysitted by my Aunt Mildred, and we were locked in the basement where she wanted us kept locked up. And I knew he was coming home soon from the naval base in Stadacona, Halifax. And I said to my sister Gay and my cousin Linda, I said, let's run away to Seabright and go down and stay with the Johnsons in the country, I said, we're treated better there, where there's no fighting. And my younger sister agreed to escape with me from the basement. And we went out through a basement window, and later we headed to Seabright and got picked up and got brought back. And of course I went and got my strapping and beating again. And then I talked my younger sister into running away from home again with me. And we went around the streets of Halifax, and I panhandled and asked people for a nickel so I could phone my grandmother. And it was just an excuse, and they would give me a nickel or a dime or a quarter sometimes. And we'd be roaming around hiding in different places and back of cars. And she was really cold, and I stole this coat from this one vehicle. And when I put it on, it would go way past my hands, and it would be way down to my feet. But it kept me warm, and then I'd give it to my sister to keep her warm. And then I found this grated area where I lifted this grate up, and you could drop down in it and put the grate over you so we could hide there. And one point I told her, I said, "Gay, you stay here. I'm going off to get some food for us." And I said, "I'll be back." And I scurried out, and I went up to a little store that sold vegetables and groceries and that. And I went in and I stole some bananas and apples or whatever I could grab, and out the door I'd go, and I'd go back and meet up with my sister, and we'd eat that. And eventually, that one particular night, she said, I'm really cold, I'm cold. And I said, well, I know where we can go to get warm. And back then they had the houses heated with coal. And on the outside of the houses were these two wooden doors. So you open them up, and there was a metal slide where the coal man would come and slide the coal down. And I opened up one, and I said, I'll go down first and make certain it's all right. And I slid down and then ended up in the pile of coal. And I said, okay, Gay, you can follow me. And she'd slide down. And we got warmed up in there for the night. And the next day when we crawled out of there, we must have looked a real mess from the coal soot. And again, I would roam the streets. And of course, the police were trying to look out for these two young children that were running the streets who were reported as runaways from their home. And eventually they would spot us and arrest us. And back home we'd go, and my sister would get her strapping, and then my dad would give me my strapping, and we'd be locked up in our bedroom. And it just seemed to repeat itself. It was one cycle that just continued on forever. Of course, my younger sister never ran away with me again after that time.
Did you hate your dad?
I did. I grew up to hate him. And one of the Christmas presents he had bought me was a gun. It was a one that you could put bullets in, which had like a cap in it. And when you pulled the trigger, it would hit the cap and it would bang, setting these caps off as a real sound. And I used to like watching the westerns on the black and white TV. But one night, my older sister was babysitting myself and my younger sister. And I was in a mental state at that time where I wanted to kill my father. And I believe I may have been 7.5 years old at that time. And I knew where he had some real bullets, and there were 22 bullets. And I fitted them inside this toy gun. And I stood at the top of the stairs, and I hollered to my sister Joy, and I said, I'm going to fix Dad when he comes home. I'm going to shoot him. I'm going to kill him. And my sister saw me at the head of the stairs with this gun, and she didn't know what to do. She was terrified what I was up to. She phoned my father and told him, and he was at this naval reunion with my mother, some sort of reunion that they had at the base. So they had to come home quickly. And when he came to the bottom of the stairs, I was hollering at him, "I hate you, I hate you." And I was pointing this toy gun at him, and I was trying to pull the trigger, and of course the bullets would just fall out of it. And he came running up the stairs, and he grabbed me, and he grabbed the gun. He took me into the bedroom. He hit me with the toy gun, and then he broke the toy gun against the floor, and he strapped me, and then put me in the bed, and he said, "You're to stay there and not to move." And another time, I wanted to go out and get the gasoline for the lawnmower, and I wanted to set the house on fire and burn him up in it. Mm-hmm. And I ran away so many times that the police were fed up with looking for me and hunting me down. And when I'd run away, I'd find places to stay. If it was in the summertime, it would be in a boxcar, and I would curl up there with whatever I had stolen to put over myself to keep myself warm. And I would go into different stores, and I would steal food from the different stores and hide them in different places where I'd be hiding myself at night. And if it was in the wintertime, I'd hide myself in army barracks. They had storage lockers there. And I'd go down in the basement and squeeze into these areas and hide myself there and receive the warmth from the basement to stay warm in the winter. And other times when I felt I had to keep on the move, I'd go in one apartment building and then into another one so the police or people wouldn't report seeing me there. And again, it just became a habit. Mm-hmm. And I kept stealing from the stores, and that was my way of surviving. On the streets. Mm-hmm. And panhandling. And of course, I still wanted to be at home. Even though I found myself running the streets. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can remember the time I went back home under the cover of darkness, and I crept up the veranda, and I looked through the window into the living room, and I could see my father sitting in his favorite chair reading his Time magazine, and my mother watching the black and white TV that we had at that time, and my sister laying on the floor watching the TV. And all I had to do was knock on the door, and they would have invited me in, and everything's provided at home for me. I wasn't wanting for clothing, for food, or anything. It was the violence and the domestic disputes that were causing me to not want to be there. Mm-hmm. That was affecting me in such a negative way.
Wow, such a lonely experience, too.
Yeah. And as I looked in, I would start crying. And I would also start trembling within inside myself. And I walked down the steps again and off into the darkness, crying and angry over everything and confusion. And through the anger, I'd pick up a rock and smash a window and then run off into the darkness. And I was just a lost individual.
So you weren't able to run to somebody, to go ask for help, or to expect that somebody was going to listen and intervene. I mean, you're running away from home, running away from the trauma, being afraid of your father, all of that, but you had nowhere to run to.
I could have ran to my grandmother's home, and she would have taken me in, but I knew she would call my dad eventually. I have to go home. I can remember going to my uncle's place, and I would crawl under their porch, and I'd sleep there in the summertime at night. I was still fearful of going to my uncle because, again, I would be turned back to my father, and I knew what to expect, another beating. And I wanted to go to them, but I didn't. And the ones I did go to was one fellow who was older than me, a young teenager. And I thought he was a friend of mine because one time I met him and he said, well, anytime you're on away, you can come to my place to stay. And I went to his place this one time. He asked his brother if I could stay in the basement with him. And his brother said yes. And so I stayed in the basement with him in his room, slept in his bed with him. And I was just had my shorts on at the time when I was in bed, ready to go to sleep. And he sexually abused me, forced me into some sexual acts. And I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what he wanted, what was going on. I didn't understand this stuff.
And you're how old at this point?
I was about 8.5 years old at that point.
Okay.
And after I went through that traumatic experience that evening, he told me to not say anything to anyone, otherwise he'd hurt me. And in my mind I was thinking, what will his brother think if I tell his brother?
Where are you going, Jim?
I have to go.
Oh, but I thought we could play some darts.
No, I have to go.
I didn't know that his older brother had told him what he had done that night.
You're not going anywhere.
He pointed a weapon in my direction, and he sexually abused me.
Wow.
And I looked at him, I said, I thought you were my friend. And again, he threatened me as I was running away. He said, do you want me to shoot you? Do you want me to shoot you? And I was scared, and I kept running away. But then I found a place where I could hide myself and seclude myself. And I just curled up crying and trying to understand why did they do this. I thought they were my friends, and I still couldn't comprehend the acts that they committed on me and forced me into.
Wow. Did you tell anybody?
I was scared to, and I thought that if I told my father, he wouldn't believe me, and if he did, he would want to take me back there and I would have to face these people. And I was just too scared. So I just kept it to myself.
Kept it to yourself.
Yeah. I felt dirty. I felt ashamed. And I felt that more or less like I wish I had died. Because I didn't feel life was worth living, because everything was so negative, and all I felt was pain, and I didn't feel much happiness in my life. And I had within inside of me a sense of I can't trust older people anymore.
Yeah.
There was nobody in the community I knew that I could turn to. And so I kept running the streets and panhandling and stealing until it got to the point where I was brought before the courts on a number of charges.
So you buried all those experiences inside yourself, never felt you could trust anybody enough to feel safe to bring that out.
No.
So is it any wonder that some of your behaviors after that led you down a path to incarceration?
I understand that today, but I couldn't understand it at that young age, what it would lead me into and what sort of actions it would bring out of me. And little did I know what was still ahead of me yet to experience.
What happened next in terms of how your family was able to deal with the circumstances and you running away, having trouble in school, and all of that?
My father said he seems to have tried everything with me and nothing works. And he set me down with my mom in the kitchen, and they said they were going to take me to a place where I could stay there for a while and if I stay out of trouble for a little while, then they'll bring me back home. And they said it was an orphanage, and I didn't understand what an orphanage was. But it was a long drive from Halifax to Truro. They drove up a long driveway, and there was this big red brick building. And I didn't want to get out of the car, and my father opened the back door, and my mother grabbed a hold of my hand and said, "Come on out, Jimmy, don't be scared." And I hung on to my mother's hand while we walked up these big cement steps into the orphanage area. And there was a woman greeted us there.
This must be Mr. and Mrs. Kavanaugh. Mr. Kavanaugh, Mrs. Kavanaugh, and this must be Jimmy.
Shake the lady's hand, Jimmy.
Everything's going to be fine, Jimmy. You'll enjoy staying here with the other children until it's time to go home again.
You be a good boy, Jimmy, and do what they tell you.
And I didn't want to let go of my mother's hand.
Jimmy, let's introduce you to the house parents. They're very, very nice.
Please take me home.
I'll write you. We'll send money. So you can go to the movies and buy candy.
Please, don't leave me. Please.
Margaret, we have to go. Margaret, we have to go.
Please, don't leave me here. Please. No, please, please. No, please. Please. Please.
And then they enrolled me in a school. And again, my disability was still affecting me. The teacher would explain different stuff.
Opportunity. When opportunity not.
I was hearing what the teacher was speaking,
Can you spell dumb?
but I wasn't comprehending it.
Empty. The room was empty.
And other kids would tease me.
Empty.
When people would tease me, I would react. I would fight back.
Empty. Your head is empty.
Did you just hit him?
She phoned my dad and said, he's getting in fights and having difficulty in school.
I'm no snitch.
And finally, I made up my mind that I wasn't going to stay at the orphanage anymore.
You think you're smart. Come with me to the principal. Let's see how smart you are then.
I knew where they hid the money in a little leather pouch that my parents would send for them to give me as an allowance for to buy candies or take me in to watch movies. And then I got up early one morning and I just ran away from the orphanage.
You came home. How were things after that?
Things were pretty good. My father, he would get me involved in the Cub group and again take me swimming and a few events. And when my mother had to go to the hospital because she was pregnant again, and he was at work, he'd have a babysitter looking after me. And she was a very nice person. And they came up with the idea that because I liked her so much, that maybe I could go and stay on a farm outside of Halifax in Bridgewater with her parents and her brothers. And so I ended up going there. The babysitter would play different games with me in the farm, and we'd play cards.
Do you have any aces?
Go fish. So, did you ever build a house with cards?
No. How do you do that?
I'll show you.
Okay. I was losing anyways.
Different type of games to entertain me. She was trying to entertain me and have fun with me, and they were good times.
So what all did you get for Christmas?
A baseball glove and ball. And a really neat train set.
Oh, that sounds cool. You'll have to show me next time I'm over.
It was. But my dad beat me for taking it apart.
It's okay. It happens to everyone. Just build it again.
Then later on near Christmas time, the two brothers of the babysitter were carrying on, teasing with me, and they were just joking. But they were trying to take my clothes off in front of the others. And I think because of the sexual abuse I went through earlier, it brought a reaction out of me.
Yeah.
And I started fighting with them. And then it was soon after that that they phoned my father and said, "You better come and pick up your son because he's getting out of hand here with us." And so I was taken back home. And of course, it just started the cycle all over again.
So you weren't understood at all. I mean, you're trying to get away from the dysfunction in the family, but are made to feel like they think you're the problem.
Yeah. In my little mind, I was saying, I know my mother loves me.
Yeah.
I know my dad cares for me. I know what I do causes him to beat me. But I can't understand why he beats on my mother. That's why I act this way. But due to all of the trauma going on in that home environment, it compelled me to run to the streets, to be like in a cocoon by myself, away from everything that was affecting me. And yet, the only way you could survive on the streets was to steal.
You started to draw the attention of the police. You started to have to answer to some charges. Tell us that story, how that transpired.
Well, I accumulated a lot of juvenile offenses, and the one time my father had me in the kitchen.
Jim, come in here.
Yeah.
Sit down, son. Do you have anything to do with these charges, son? Jim, did you have anything to do with these charges?
I don't know. I know I did some of them.
I don't know what to do with you, Jim.
Anyway, he said, well, you're got to go before the courts. I was 10 years old when I was brought before the judge, and my father, he told me before he took me in to see the judge, he said, when you go in there, you're to say yes, sir, and no, sir, and that's it.
I've tried everything, Jim, and that's what I'm going to tell him.
Boy, you are charged with numerous offenses. Break and enter 15 boxcars of CN Railway, theft, vandalism to conduit pipes at Northern Electric, break and enter St. Philip's Church, break and enter St. Andrew's Church. Is this true?
Yes, sir.
You were on probation when some of these offenses occurred.
Yes, sir.
I read here you would not cooperate with the police, refusing to name your accomplices. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Your Honor, I have tried everything with Jim. Taking him to psychiatrists, beating him, involving him in sports, Cubs, YMCA, swimming. Nothing's worked, Your Honor. Maybe the courts can do something with him.
Well, in light of the facts before me and what you have said, the court has no choice but to send you to the Nova Scotia Reform School.
And entering the Shelburne Reform School, the counselors were very rough and brutal with us. And they put us through a process of changing our clothes, taking everything away from us, giving a new set of clothes, showering us, putting disinfectant in our hair and all that stuff. And at different points, I was beaten by different staff members called counselors. And they always wanted to do that to put fear into us kids. And one time, I was in an altercation with a counselor because I pointed something out that he did, wrong against another boy. And he said, everyone line up. And all the boys lined up, single file, 1 arm length apart. And he said, okay, Kavanaugh, you're to go through the gauntlet. Go through their legs. And he told the other boys that you better take it out on him. And of course, some of the ones that liked me, they hesitated on how they would hit me. And when I finished getting through the gauntlet, the counselor said, I saw some of you didn't hit him properly. You were holding back. And he said, you're to go through again. And I had to go through it again.
So Jim, while you're at the reform school, what other types of punishments were inflicted on you?
Well, the first time that I was punished was for talking after lights out. There's another young fellow who asked where I was from, and I was whispering to him, telling him I was from Halifax, and the lights came on automatically from the one counselor, and he beat me on my bare bottom with a sneaker. And then he done the same to the other boy. Then another time it was in the dining room area where they had big heavy soup spoons. And he would use the heavy soup spoon or the heavy end of a knife handle, the table knife handle. And he would make you bend your head down like this, and he'd crack you on the center of the head, the soft spot of a baby area. And it would send shock waves through your brain and make you cry. You'd rub your head from the pain. In the games room, this big Mr. Burton, he thought it was really hilarious. He would get these steel chairs, and you'd hold the chair out like this. And of course, the chair gets heavier and heavier, and as your arms go down, he would come up and hit you and get the chair up there again, and you're trying to hold it up, and then it's going down and down, and he would use either a stick or a coat hanger or whatever he wanted to use to whack you across the back of the thighs or the calves.
Now you're going to be cleaning the clothes room.
This was the same counselor who later on took me up to a storeroom where I had to go up for a sweater and that, and sorting and stuff. And I heard the door click behind me, and before I could turn around, he had grabbed me on the back of my neck. And I was just a little tiny kid, skinny. And he says, I'm going to teach you to be a good boy. And I tried to struggle to get out of his grip that was hurting my neck. And he pulled his zipper down on his pants. And then he forced me into a sexual act to perform on him. And afterwards he said, if you be a good boy, I will give you gum and some cigarettes and candy bars, and you'll be good like the other boys are. And I went downstairs into what they call the games room or common room. And I went down to the farthest part of the room, and I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall, and I pulled my knees up and wrapped my arms around it. One of my friends come over because he could see I was crying. And I was very hurt. I was shaken. I said, he had sex with me, he's a sick bastard. And it wasn't long after that, of course, I ran away. And I got many beatings after that in the reform school, and I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of other boys that were abused. And it wasn't until the 1990s, through a big provincial investigation, they discovered that there were some counselors there that were pedophiles that abused a lot of us young boys in that reform school.
Wow.
Yeah.
More trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So finally, it wasn't all about you. Others were experiencing some of the same things as you were.
Many other young boys were suffering the same things I was, and a lot of them ended up in the penitentiary system, just like I did.
I know, I've interviewed them many times.
Yeah.
Yeah. You ran away yet again from reform school. Tell us about that.
Which time? Because I had run away over 42 times. I escaped out of their cells and stole cars and boats and all kinds of stuff to get away from that area. But it eventually brought me before the judge over all those escapes. I was age 15 then. And the juvenile court judge wanted to send me back to the reform school. He didn't want to send me to the penitentiary.
Don't send me back to the reform school. Send me to the prison.
I don't want to do that. You're just 15 years old.
I'm not afraid of the penitentiary. Probably be better than the reform school. Can't be any worse.
He didn't realize all of what I was going through. And he looked at me and he said, well, young man,
You will get your wish. Mr. Kavanaugh, it will be your responsibility to take your son back home with you and wait for the sheriff who will escort him to Dorchester.
and I was sent away to Dorchester Penitentiary at age 15. And when I entered into the prison system, I was being taken up there by a police officer and a sheriff. And as we got to the front doors of the prison, the one policeman said, well, they'll fix you here, kid. They'll use you here as a girl. And my response to me, I said, I'll kill the first person that bothers me. But I was scared. I was just a skinny little 90-pound kid walking up those stairs. And the cement steps were high, and I had leg irons on me and handcuffs, and the police had to help me up. And when they opened the door, there was a big guard there in a beige type uniform. And his comment sort of was like, oh, you brought us a tough case here. And I just looked at him. I was still scared. And they were taking me in. They put me in a holding cell there. And after that, I never seen the policeman again. I was taken by a guard, and I was processed, whereas my hair was cut short. I was given a prison uniform, convict uniform. They were called, we were all referred to as convicts back then. I was given a number on the front of my shirt, on the back of my shirt. And then they took me to a cell. And of course, some prisoners along the way seen this young little kid coming in, and they were catcalling me, and I wanted to answer back to them, but I was scared. And the guard finally took me to a cell in one of the newer cell blocks called B7 Cell Block in Dorchester. And he locked me in, and I just laid down in the bed. And I was sort of like in shock. They tried to keep the young offenders separated from the adult offenders as much as possible, because the young offenders all had a Y in front of their number if they were under 18 years old. And after I seen my classification officer, who was a lady, she asked me a lot about my problematic background.
I'm Mrs. McBates. I will be your classification officer. I see that you're quite the handful for the authorities at the reform school. And from the age of 10 until your present age, you ran away or escaped from them over 42 times. You ran away from a psychiatric hospital once and made a second attempt. James, you ran away from your home many times, which is what put you in the reform school, due to the stealing and causing property damage and, well, the list goes on and on. You won't be running away or escaping from here. James, you've had a troubled life and have caused trouble for many people. Can you tell me why?
I don't know, I guess it's just whenever I stay in one place for too long, I end up getting hurt or whatever. I don't know. When I was young, I got molested and beat up, and in the reform school, it was no different. I was beat so many times, and the counselors, even they were beating me, and they molested me. I don't know, I had to do something about it.
You won't be beaten or abused by any of the staff here. But I cannot guarantee the convicts that you'll be serving with. If you run into any trouble, you must request an interview with me. Now, you'll go before the work board, and they will assign you to a school. Behave yourself, James. The officer will take you back now.
And I was taken back to my cell. And again, I was scared, and I went before a work board. And the work board, because of my grade 4 education, they said, you're going to be assigned to the school area. And when I went to the school area, it wasn't long. There was a guy sitting behind me, a tall fellow. His name was Reggie. And he reached over and he stroked my hair. He said, you're a cute kid. And I knew what he was referring to, and he was coming on to me. So I said to the teacher, I put my hand up. He said, yes. I said, can I use the washroom? He said, yes. I went and used the washroom. I come back and I picked up a chair and I come behind him. I smashed it on his head. And we got into a fight, and I was no match for him. He was bigger than me and tall. But I was letting him know and everyone else I'm not taking anything from anyone.
What was your first year like?
I became friends with a few people, but I was very guarded in how close I would let them get near to me, because I still had mistrust for everyone. And I was always trying to stay in the open where I could be seen around a lot of people and nobody could get me in a corner area or alone anywhere. And there was one fellow at one point who tried to bother me, and I had bent this piece of wire off a bucket. I had taken it off of and sharpened it. And anyway, I ended up chasing him and stabbing him with it. And of course, it wasn't that sharp, so it didn't go in deeply into him. And others saw that. And I guess they referred to him, that kid's got a lot of spunk in him. He's fighting for himself. And then others befriended me. And one of them was Rennie Robert. He was in with the organized crime family down in Montreal. And he became friends with me, and he told a lot of others, don't be bothering that kid. In other words, they'd have problems with him, I guess. And another fellow that I became friends with was Ernie Hollins. He was trying to escape all the time, and he said, kid, it's going to be tough for you here in prison because of your age and you're young. But if you have problems, come and let some of us guys know about it, and we'll see if we can't step in and stop it before it gets out of hand. And Ernie worked in the kitchen at that time, and he was always trying to escape, and I looked up to him, and I'd sit there and listen to some of the stories. Became fascinated with these stories over robbing banks and getting away and the chases and that. And then when Renee would tell me about how to take down safes and open them up and the tools you needed, I became fascinated with that. And then the next person that I talked with there, he was very clever on opening locks. And he showed me the lock picks, and he said, this is the material you make it out of, and this is how you shape them and so forth. And then he'd show me a lock. Now, you do this and this, and the next thing you knew, I knew how to pick locks. As time went on, these were the people I socialized with in that prison setting. And I started taking pride in myself that, hey, I'm learning what they know, I can use this when I get out. And when I was 16, just coming on the 16th birthday, I was coming down the range, and I seen a couple guys loitering on the range, and I was leery. What are they up to? What are they up to? Because you're always on your guard in prison.
Happy birthday, Kavanaugh.
Thanks, Bob. Happy birthday, kid. This is from all the guys. Just make sure you don't spend the rest of them in here like me.
I opened it up, and it had all kinds of names signed on it by all kinds of prisoners. And there's Renee's and Ernie Hollins and Peter Forstall and all kinds of guys' names on it. And I started getting emotional there. But you got to be tough in prison. You got to hide back your emotions. And I was trying to hold back the tears. And then guys came out of cells and said, happy birthday, Jim, happy birthday. They said, Ernie Hollins wants to see you later out near the weight pit there. And I went out there, and him and Renee were there and others. And again, they were saying, happy 16th, Jim. And of course, I told them that I was coming up for parole. And there was one old timer. He told me, he said, Jim,
just don't get your hopes up. Some guys, it really messes them up when they don't get it.
And he said, if you expect nothing, you won't be as disappointed. He says, because there's guys in here who've been turned down for parole. And after they've been turned down for parole, they went back to their cell and they slashed their arms up. They've hung themselves. They've smashed themselves up and gone into the hole and spent months in the hole. And I never ever forgot that. There was a friend of mine named Gordy who I'd become very close friends with. And we wanted to escape and go rob some banks in Montreal. And I told him I'd escape with him and that. And we applied to go to this farm camp. And I didn't think I'd ever get to the farm camp. It's a minimum camp. But anyway, he got there. And then I got approved. I was surprised because I knew how many times I ran away from the reform school. Why would they be putting me out to the farm camp where there's no fences, no walls?
Yeah.
And before I got out there, my friend Gordy ran away and escaped. He got caught in Montreal and he was brought back to the prison. Why did you escape and not wait for me? He said, well, my friend came down from Montreal. He couldn't wait. The car was there to take me up to Montreal. I had to leave then, Jim. I couldn't wait for you. I said, man, I wanted to go too. He said, I'm sorry, Jim. And Gordy was a lifer and a really nice guy. And it was about a week or so after that, after we talked.
Kid, I have something to tell you. You're not going to want to hear it. Gordy hung himself last night in his cell.
Gordy?
Well, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I just, because those in prison became my family, those who I became close to. I was devastated.